How's the Iran conflict going to affect you financially, especially as an investor or someone that's interested in buying a home? I'm Jason Kish. I'm in the commercial real estate investing space. This is the second installment on how the war in Iran will impact real estate. In the last video, we broke down how petroleum costs add directly and indirectly to the price of just about everything in the real estate supply chain. Today's video, we'll focus on how inflation affects mortgages, the lock-in effect, and how the long-term cost of high oil prices impact where people live. Let's start by talking about how inflation impacts borrowing costs. For starters, inflation reduces the likelihood of rate cuts. When the Federal Reserve talks about rate cuts, they're talking about the SOFR, or the Secured Overnight Financing Rate. It's a really sophisticated system, and honestly, it would take its own separate video to walk through how that actually works. We'll just talk about it at the surface level today and how it relates to real estate. The SOFR primarily impacts floating rate debt. Here's roughly how it works. You take SOFR plus a spread, and that's the interest rate. For instance, the SOFR right now is roughly 3.6%. So if a lender is willing to give you SOFR plus 3%, that would make your rate 6.6% right now. But if SOFR goes up or down, then the interest rate that you actually pay on that loan will float with it and go up or down based on what's happening with the overnight rate. As you can see here, the Fed had the interest rate a little bit higher. They actually jacked up the overnight rate very substantially in 2022 and 2023. But we're looking at 2025 to where we are now. And you can see the Fed didn't cut for a little bit. So you have a pretty steady rate here. And then each time they cut, you can see that SOFR, or the overnight rate, drops with every cut. So here we are, they've cut multiple times in the past year or so that's where we've had the drops. Inflation going up ties their hands because they have what's called a dual mandate. They need to keep the inflation low, and they also need to keep the job market healthy. So as inflation goes up, there's the risk that if they lower interest rates more, that will actually spur the inflation more. So their hands are tied, and this conflict in Iran is making it harder for them to lower this interest rate. So let's talk now about what impacts fixed rates. So that's actually the bond market, specifically the long-term government bonds. So bonds are issued as a way for the government to borrow money. There are a lot of things that impact the yield on bonds, or the percentage that is paid out for those bonds. A couple of those big drivers are how much money is the government spending right now, because fiscal deficits, or them spending more money, increases the supply of bonds. So if there are more bonds out there, they have to offer higher yields on those bonds to get more buyers into the mix and being interested in purchasing those bonds. Now, this is a really big driver, and that's inflation expectations. If inflation is at 4%, do you want to tie up your money in a 30-year government bond getting 3%? No, nobody wants to do that because you're really losing the value of your money. So if inflation looks like it's going to go up, the yield on bonds have to go up as well. That's what really drives the price of mortgages. So it's the same kind of idea that I was talking about with the floating rate, where you have the SOFR plus a spread. You might have the 10-year Treasury yield, for instance, that 10-year government bond, and then there will be a spread on top of that, and that's how you find out what the interest rates are. Speaking of the 10-year Treasury bond, you can see that in that same time period where it looked really clean on the SOFR rate, where it was high and then it came down, and then it came down, and it came down as the government cut, the 10-year Treasury bond is impacted by a lot more factors than the overnight rate is. So all those factors, you can see those play out in the volatility. Now, since this conflict started and the inflation fears have started because of the risk of increased petroleum prices, you can see that the 10-year Treasury looks like it's gone straight up, and that has directly impacted mortgage prices. Interest rates don't just make borrowing more expensive, inflation and increased rates may exacerbate something called the lock-in effect too. This is going to impact the housing market in a way that might be just as strong as the interest rates themselves. If somebody has a 3% mortgage and they would like to move somewhere, but now they need to pay 6.5% for that mortgage, they'll be paying way more for their mortgage payment if they're just moving from one house to another. Until the rates go down substantially, those people just aren't going to go anywhere. So that's really reducing the amount of supply that buyers have. You can see the different tranches of those mortgage rates. About 51% of them are actually below 4%, which is, it's kind of unbelievable, but all these people are locked into these low mortgage rates and they're pretty unlikely to sell their house unless rates come close. Now, more and more people are getting higher mortgages. People need to move. They might have a different job, or they need to move because they're taking care of parents or something like that. So the lock-in is slowly loosening up, but it's definitely still a big factor as long as these high interest rates, because of the higher inflation that we're seeing, are still in effect. In summary, there are a lot of factors impacting real estate. High interest rates will also impact multifamily real estate and commercial real estate in general, because those higher interest costs will reduce the amount that a buyer is willing to spend on it because of the interest payments that they need to pay on that. But it also changes the cap rate. It raises the cap rate on it, which, if you look into how cap rates work, actually reduces the cost of that asset. So right now there are a couple more factors that may keep the price of some of those assets lower. Could be a great time to buy, but it remains a really tough time to sell commercial real estate. So what can you do about it? The best action that somebody can take is cut out the superfluous spending, find a smart way to invest into assets that will appreciate with inflation, and even better, pay you to own them. So now could actually be a great time to buy a home, but you need to be really, really patient and really choosy. Now's the time that if a seller needs to sell, you could get a really great deal on a home. But keep in mind that the high volatility and the high interest costs could be a big impact to you. I sincerely hope that we get this figured out. Most importantly, because I want to see a road to peace. Secondarily, that peace could lead to lower cost of living and an easier path to prosperity. Leave a comment if you have any questions about the video. Please like and subscribe because it helps the channel immensely. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.